I love finding new, interesting projects that are happening in the world of music and tech. 'Cause I'm a nerd. And while nerding around, I found an interesting project. It's a tool that uses AI to produce a vocal performance out of a music notation software. The tool is called Cantai, and it sounds like this.
Awake on north wind and come the south. Blow upon my garden, let the spices may flow out. Let the spices flow out.
Yeah, but that's an ensemble performance. What does a solo sound like?
Oh, vision, oh dream. The crowd there now underneath.
So you write the notes and the lyrics inside the music notation software, and this is what it produces. It's like Note Performer, but for vocals. Okay, Cantai, you have my attention. Who made this thing? One guy. One guy made this project. Needless to say, I had questions. So I called him. Hi, Richard. Nice to have you with us.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit, what is Cantai?
At the core, it's a performance engine for vocals. The underlying technology is a machine learning-based AI singing tech. It's there are several libraries out there that do it. There are several open source libraries, and Cantai is a performance wrapper of those, so that you can take a MIDI file or a music XML file or whatever you're working in and go as cleanly from there to a singing voice as possible with minimal user interaction. There are tools that do that as well, that require a lot of user interaction, and my main goal with Cantai was to have no user interaction beyond what they write in the score.
So essentially we're talking about making the action of turning written music into performance a lot more accessible when it comes to vocals, whether it's solo or group singing, right? That's actually very interesting. You're a composer and you develop Cantai on your own, and you're heading the development. What got you to move in that direction, to decide to develop it?
In the late winter of 2023, I had started writing an AI-based opera, which I still plan to get back to. It's a performance engine itself, where the story, the characters, the design, everything comes from AI, but human directed. So a person like me has a story in mind, and I can use a tool to describe the visuals, to describe the characters. If you've ever used a image generator, then just think of a everything generator, but geared toward opera. And that was the idea. So as I started developing this engine, I quickly came to realize that I would have to spend a lot more time on the core singing engine to make it do what I needed, because the solutions that were out there were very mechanical. They were very, they lacked emotion. There was very little expressive possibilities with each of the voices. And there were really only a couple of languages you could do. It was almost entirely either Japanese or English and nothing else. So over the course of a few months, I decided that it would be in my best interest to either create an engine of my own or to find one that I could tune up, an open source solution that I could make do what I needed it to do. And then I came to the decision, well, why not just make this the first product? Because then I could use the income that I get from selling the synthesizer to produce the operas that I was looking to produce. Because I don't just have my own, I don't have the AI operas alone. I also have my own operas that I've written, by hand, and want to be able to produce them. And this is another way I can do that.
The idea kind of stemmed out of you working on your own creation, and you're thinking, well, I need to create a tool so I can make that creation, and that tool could help other people as well.
Right.
That's really cool. What would you say was the most, or is the most challenging part when it comes to making Cantai?
The insane variety of music that you have to be able to cover. If you open up a program like Dorico or MuseScore and you have a blank page, literally anything that you can enter into that program needs to be able to be interpreted by a singing voice. And that means there are just thousands and thousands and thousands of combinations of things between the lyrics that you're singing, the language that you're singing, the expression in the voice, the meaning that you're trying to convey in what you're singing, because it's more than just singing the notes that you see on the page. You need to know what else is on the page, and you need to know why this page is in what it's in. So the early versions of Cantai are only going to have so much performance knowledge, but I'm also working on large language models and multimodal models that will also be interpreting the score itself. So as it is preparing the performance for one particular line, it's also looking at the score as a whole, and it knows where that fits in there. And it knows things like if it sees something, a term like sottovoce, it knows not only that it needs to lighten the voice, but it knows why, and it knows when that needs to happen, and it has the tools to be able to do that. There are quite a few AI developments recently that are letting AI use tools, and agents are becoming the next big thing. And that's basically what it is. It's a singing agent, and it has the ability to use the technical aspects of Cantai that I give it and produce a performance based on that.
One challenge is to make it as considerate as possible towards the material that is written, but another layer of challenge is making it aware of the whole, so the context in which it performs, which is definitely a challenge, but a necessity when it comes to music, which is why I think AI that perceives audio as input is relatively scarce these days. For the most part, even if somebody is speaking to the AI, you would still transcribe it to text before you can turn it into tokens. And you already have strategies in mind how you're going to work towards that goal?
Most of them actually have been implemented in theory and in tests that we've run here. I say we've, but it's been just me up until about 3.5 weeks ago, and there are now I don't know how many, 7 of us. There are tests that have run from the beginning. Like the very earliest version of this was the phonemes that we parse. So whenever you have lyrics come in, you need to turn that into the phonemes that can be used to build the line to sing. So the very first version of Cantai used a LLM-based phoneme converter. So, and it was GPT done over their API.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just pass in the lyrics and tell GPT, okay, here's your limited set of phonemes. Please take that text and use these phonemes and output the phonemes I need in the order I need to sing this text. And it worked perfectly. The only bottleneck came with the limitations of the accounts. So unless you're spending $1 million a month, then they throttle the traffic that you can do. So they only give you a certain number of requests per month. But in recent months, that has improved because there are so many more people using it, and they had to be a little less restrictive. So even though the beta version and probably the first commercial version of Cantai isn't going to contain that particular ability, very soon after launch it will, because we'll have our own multimodal model that runs on the server that is capable of doing the phoneme conversion as well as some other tasks that we need done.
So at first, when we're talking about the beta or even the early stages of release, we are talking about phonetic writing that would be read by the model. It would need phonetic writing instead of just lyrics.
No, we're using open source solutions like the CMU dictionary, the Carnegie dictionary, and other similar ones for other languages. So it's a fixed list of words and their phoneme counterparts. But that only goes so far because you have a finite list of words in that file. And eventually you need to start adding words when you don't have them. So that's going to be the first combination that we do, is using an LLM to add new words as they show up, rather than try to deal with every word. And so what it'll do is when you have your lyrics come in, it'll analyze them, look up the words and find the ones that it knows about already from the text dictionary, and use the LLM to discover what the phonemes are for the rest, and then add it to the text dictionary. And then next time it processes it that way. But eventually everything will move to the model.
When it comes to the LLM itself, are you guys working with a fine-tuned version of your own or one of the open source LLMs?
Yeah, we're probably going to end up using one of the new models that has come out recently. I don't know which one yet. There are so many.
Yeah, and they keep coming out.
Yeah, we're probably going to use a really small, fine-tuned version for the phoneme processing because we're also working on an engine that runs locally, and that will also have to run there. So in order to get everything to run offline, we'll need to do the phoneme processing offline as well.
When it comes to the synth portion of that agent, generating that vocal, are you guys working on the basis of something that is open source and you developed it, or is it from the ground up something that you've been working on?
Initially, it was something that I was working on from scratch, but then right around June, I discovered the Ace company.
Hmm.
They have a Studio, which is an AI-based singing application. It's meant to work with DAWs. So if you have a digital audio workstation like Cubase or Logic or Pro Tools, it's meant to go alongside those. And it has the piano roll editor with phonemes and whatnot. So I was able to try it out there and discover that, yeah, it's a really high quality engine. And was also extremely pleased to discover that they had an API. And that immediately meant that I didn't have to write my own engine or didn't have to build my own engine. So that's what we're doing is the core rendering is done by the ACE API, but it's a very literal engine. So whatever you pass in is exactly what you get out. So in between the score and the engine is Cantai, where it is aware of your score, it is aware of how to sing, it's aware of what you mean when you say certain expressions, and it produces a file that we can send to the renderer and get back the performance that we want.
So it provides a layer of interpretation that makes the playback of that score a lot more convincing. Is it similar, maybe in a way, to how Note Performer does it as an add-on with the interpretation of how notes work, not the obviously the neural network?
Right. Well, as a matter of fact, Note Performer was the inspiration behind the design of Cantai, and but only to the point where there is no user interface. Like if you use Note Performer, you're not aware of it there unless you need to look at the logo or something, because it takes 100% of its direction from your score. So I figured let's do the same thing for vocals. So that's what it is. There is a little box that you can look at, and in the beta version, you have to use that to drag and drop a little bit on certain platforms. But the final version will just be a logo on a little window because all the performance data comes from the score itself.
That's really cool. You talked about the languages being limited in previous solutions, stuff like that. Cantai is planning to have more languages than that.
Yes. At the moment, it supports English, Spanish, Chinese, and Japanese. And over the next few months, we're going to be adding German, Italian, French, Latin, and possibly one or two more. And I'm going to be providing some of the singers to get that started. The first language we're going to be tackling is German.
That is an assignment unto itself, I'm sure. So from friends of mine that are learning German, I'm sure it's a challenge. Let's talk about MuseScore for a second. MuseScore is an open source notation software, and they've been going through a lot of changes lately in recent years, basically writing the software from the ground up, and I'm sure it will give it longevity. As far as I'm aware, Cantai also will have integration with MuseScore, right?
Correct.
So Sibelius, Dorico, and MuseScore, that's the general direction.
Even though they've gone out of production or business, I don't know the details. Finale will also not be officially supported, but we're definitely going to test it with Cantai because we know there are a lot of people that are still using their older versions of Finale, so we don't want to leave them out.
Yeah, that's actually, I'm sure they'll appreciate it. I've talked to a lot of people who didn't see it coming, basically, which is something I would love to ask you about. It seems like companies are looking for the kind of format, the kind of system they can use to keep supporting their software, but avoid taxing the user, let's say, beyond what they'll be willing to do. And we can see different approaches to that. Dorico does it by version, and Sibelius does it by subscription. How do you think that might affect the development of tools like Cantai, which are, as far as I know, Cantai is one-time purchase and lifetime access, right?
Correct.
So how do you plan on balancing it out? Because when Cantai is releasing, at first it's releasing with cloud support, cloud rendering support, with plans to, after a few months, 6 months, or maybe a bit more, small development teams do need to keep flexible with timings, but planning on making it offline available. How the cloud processing, let's say, how is that going to be supported if people are paying a one-time fee?
Right. Well, the other half of this brings me back to the opera that I mentioned earlier. The AI opera will be running via the Cantai API. So whenever a character sings, then it will hit the API and get the rendering from there. So we're opening up the API to anyone that wants to use it for a usage fee. So for instance, if you are creating an educational game with singing in it, you can use the API to generate the singing for your game. We're going to be promoting the API just as much as the plugin, because I think not only is it going to provide the income we need, but it's also going to be an area that's going to open up the use for this in ways that I don't really know of right now.
Richard did later clarify that the project might move to a subscription model, but at the moment, anybody who purchased the one-time fee will still have lifetime access. That means any usage they make of Cantai in the future will not be bound by subscription. Okay, so the usage, the implementation of the API in different projects, that is going to help pay for the processing of Cantai, but it's not going to be a fee that Cantai users are paying as they render.
That is correct.
Tell me about something that was very crucial to you, that you kept in front of you the whole time, to not get lost in the sauce, so to speak. Things that no matter how we change that system, these things are a definite for us. It's not negotiable.
Well, the first one right off the bat is that it require no user interaction beyond writing the score. It would be really easy to offload some of that processing onto the user by opening up a window and saying, here, play around with these phonemes for a while until it sounds like you want it to. That's the first non-negotiable. If you can't put it in the score and hear it sung, then we're obviously not doing something right. The other is the performance itself. In the beginning, I had only planned on this being something to be used for mock-ups. Like, I didn't imagine that would be the kind of thing you could actually use in a recording. But as I've enlisted more singers and worked on more demos, and suddenly I'm realizing not only could this sound as good as real singers, it could possibly sound better. Especially when you do things like write music that doesn't conform to the way it's been written a million times before over the past 300 or 400 years. So that's one of the things that I like doing, is taking these tools and putting them in situations that you couldn't do with a real person, like having somebody that has a vocal cords that are 6 inches around, or singing so fast or so slow that a human couldn't keep up either. Just the things that you want to be able to try that you can't hire a singer to do because it's physically impossible. That's one of the other things I like about No Performer, is they don't limit your playback. Like, there are a lot of sample libraries. In fact, most sample libraries, when you get to the bottom or the top of an instrument's range, it just stops. You do have the ability to stretch it if you know what you're doing. You can get under the hood and you can say, okay, that's not the real ending here. It just goes on and just stretch it. But most of them don't do that out of the box. But No Performer lets you perform any note on any instrument. So I started doing things like using a flute 3 octaves or 4 octaves lower as a really, really light tuba, and it sounds awesome. And things like using a English horn instead of a trombone, because it's got a little bit more bite in a certain direction. You can try things that just wouldn't work in an orchestra or wouldn't work in another situation. And that's what I want people to do with Cantai. I want to see what they can make a human voice do that it wasn't designed to do out of the box. I mean, obviously, most of it has to do with singing rules, but a lot of it has to do with traditions. If you're writing music in a particular genre, it's very dangerous to try something outside of that genre. Well, that's not a limitation anymore.
Is there an element of physical modeling in the way that the synthesizer works? Because part of the problem with sample libraries is they do lean very heavily on what they recorded. The only thing they have to work with is manipulating recordings to adhere with intuitive playback. But it sounds like this type of synthesizer is more on the physical modeling part of things, in which you work with unlikely but physical qualities of the instrument. Is that what's under the hood there?
Not quite. The physical modeling more refers to a mathematical model of an instrument, and this can produce really good results, but it's a really, really difficult process, even for an instrument as simple as like a recorder. But as soon as you get into the human voice, physical modeling becomes problematic because it's so complicated and there are so many different types of sounds it has to come up with. The model that we're using is, instead of being a mathematical model, I mean, technically it's stored mathematically, but it's more based on the same principles that AI images and movies use, where the training data is put into a system that learns what the training data means.
It is working in the same form of logic as a model that is trained to, through diffusion, let's say, interpret what's missing in an
Actually,
image.
that's a good way to think about it, because of the mathematical model, you really have to know everything the sound is capable of before you build the model, so you know how to create it. With AI and machine learning, it's more a case of you show it everything you know about voices, and then it uses everything you have shown it to build new words. So it knows what a T sounds like, it knows what an A sounds like, and you can use everything it knows to produce new words that it didn't necessarily were contained in its training data.
Going back to the local versus cloud situation, the way you see it now, is it likely that the model will be able to run on CPU alone? I do believe more and more people will get into buying graphics cards as a part of their professional setup, but not a lot of musicians necessarily have that.
Well, most computers that come out these days will have some kind of graphics processor.
Yeah, but if it's AI capable or not is the, let's say, a different question.
In the case of the model that we're working on, as long as it is capable of being recognized by the software, then it doesn't necessarily need to be a specific type, so long as the processing can be offloaded onto it. But we're also going to try to support CPU-based rendering. It'll be a whole lot slower, but it will make it more compatible. Plus, that will allow us to try to tackle things like iPads and rendering from something like that. Currently, what happens is when you load your score and you create an instance of Cantai on a track, it will read all of the vocal tracks and start processing immediately. And it does so in roughly 10 to 20-second chunks. And either start playing, or as you start editing, it's going to be rendering in the background and caching the files locally, so that when you're done, you can leave the project and then come back and not have to re-render. But if you make a change to something and save your file, it will know that this is the section that you just changed, and is only going to render what it needs to. So, there's not a constant stream of information flowing back and forth. It's really just as fast as one person is able to write and make their changes.
Yeah, so you're also minimizing that way the token usage, because you're only sending the changes. There are some exciting news about Dorico. Tell us about it.
Well, the reason we even started talking to them in the first place is because Dorico is a closed source application. So if it doesn't do what we need it to right out of the box, then we're at the mercy of people who have the control of that source. Fortunately, those people are really nice and really friendly, and they have the capability to see the vision of what's going on. And they had a meeting with us, and we spent almost an hour talking about our needs, and they very kindly agreed to help us out. And so in an upcoming update, I don't have any dates yet, but in an update, they're going to have direct support for Cantai. And what that means technically is we can see the entire score, because right now we can't. You can control Dorico with a remote control. So if I was building a piece of hardware and I wanted to actually control Dorico, I could do that, but it's a one-way street. You can't get any information back. So they're giving us the ability to see the information we need from the score, so that when you press save, everything you see in front of you, we now have access to, and we can make it sing.
There is a very passionate, active, and very nice, by the way, and honest community on Discord for Cantai. You can get into it through the website. And you've been very active there when it comes to updating people on what's going on and how you're planning to tackle stuff. There's a lot of transparency. Do you think that's something that other companies and businesses should implement? Because it's not something you're seeing a lot of, that kind of transparency.
It really depends. I mean, larger companies, I doubt that they'd be able to do that because there's a lot of clearance required when you're talking about a lot of things, and there's a hierarchy you have to go through, and a lot of time needs to be spent doing that. You know, I probably spend an hour or two every day just corresponding on Discord and email and Facebook and other places with folks who have questions. And a large company couldn't necessarily do that. I can do it because I'm otherwise unemployed. So I'm just working on Cantai. So I have the time. And I found that the more people know about what you're doing, the easier it is for them to understand, you know, at what level they want to be involved.
So in a way, it is a kind of potential superpower for smaller businesses or development teams. Have you seen positive response to that kind of, you know, ongoing interaction, to the transparency?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first reactions that I like to see are people saying that the voices sound good. They approve of the sound of Cantai. That's the first thing. I found that most people that have questions about it prefer someone who can just answer them. You know, the more information you can give early on and the faster you can answer people's questions, the less speculation there is amongst themselves as well. I wasn't originally involved in posting on places like the Virtual Instrument Forum, and I go there frequently now because before I showed up there was a lot of speculation and a lot of, I wonder what's going on, you know. And so by the time I got involved, I had a huge list of questions to answer, but I try to keep up with it now. And it's a lot easier with Discord because if I tell people this is where I like things to be, then, you know, the folks that show up there, I have a really direct way of talking with them. And it helps me to keep information in one place as much as possible.
And it seems very effective. And I encourage anyone, by the way, that has questions, that has anything they're curious about, check the website. We'll put in the description, and check the Discord. If we already have the privilege of transparency, we might as well use it. If you had unlimited resources when it comes to developing Cantai, what would you look at as like the peak of what it could be?
Well, it's the continuation of my opera plans. Right now, Cantai is a singing synthesizer that works on a written score. My goal is to pursue what I started laying out in my essay on my SoundCloud and on the website, is about the future of opera and where it's headed. That's really what's driving everything that's even remotely related to this. And I'm sure this concept is floating out there somewhere, but the idea is to create a meta macro brush that artists can paint with. And by that, I mean, Cantai does the vocal portion of a song. You have AI out there who are also doing the instrumental portion of a song. But if you imagine that the resulting song is now on the tip of your brush, you can then paint with a song. You can paint with entire songs. You can paint with entire elements of songs and elements of production. So all of a sudden you have a brush that contains the singers and the orchestra. And since you have that, you can narrow the focus of the controls down so that a single person like me could, in fact, perform an entire opera by himself or herself by simply using this meta macro brush, where you have the entire multimodal model in a single point that you can direct in any way you want to. I think eventually most of AI will somehow get wrapped into that kind of direction or that kind of tool use, because eventually it's all going to be models, and software that as we know it is just going to go away.
I'm a big supporter of exploring new tech, new abilities, creating new abilities. And when I teach, my students are often kind of worried about the entrance of AI into the world of music. Is it going to replace them? Is it going to make music as a whole less human? Personally, I usually tell them that if anybody's going to make music less human, it's humans who decide to give away all creative responsibility to an AI. But what would you say to people who might be reluctant to accept the existence or the entry of AI into the world of music?
Well, we're in a historical parallel right now in more ways than one. But if you compare the AI aspect of it in relation to creativity, you just have to look only as far back as the invention of computer graphics. The traditional artists that were around at the time and part of the industry were in the same position. They're worried that computer graphics is going to take over their jobs, and to a large degree it did. But it also created an art form that didn't exist before, which not only could utilize the skills of those artists, but amplify them. So if you imagine the same thing happening, but on a slightly different scale now, where you have artists who have the ability to create something like an opera, and suddenly not only do you have the ability to create an opera, but you have the ability to reinvent it in your own way. You have a vision for what it could become. And that's what I'm hoping to do next once Cantai gets established, is to use these tools to define what the next version of opera looks like. And this isn't going to put any singers out of work. In fact, it's going to be employing them, because that's part of the model of Cantai, is to hire singers and pay them for what they do. And it's just going to do it in a different way, something that we don't know what it looks like quite yet. And that's the cool part about the position we're in, is we're the ones that get to invent that. We're the Lasseters, we're the John Lasseters of this generation. We get the choice of deciding, we get to choose which direction it goes in.
By choosing to maintain the ethical line and saying, okay, we work with the voices of different performers, but we are paying them and having them fully aware, that kind of ethical line is not yet bound by law, but by businesses choosing to hold it as the integrity of the craft. Honestly, the whole thing sounded really cool. I was really happy to hear that the vocalists were going to be paid some sort of royalties, like a percentage when somebody's using their voice with the API. And they are going to record more soloists, more choirs. So I asked Richard if there's a way for people to get involved.
Yes, the most immediate need is for choir singers. And we need about 100, 150 of them roughly. And the process of recording is very similar to what Eric Whitaker did with his virtual choir. The only difference is people don't have to sing a specific song. In other words, they don't have to rehearse a particular song and sing it in time in order for it to fit with a particular performance. They can pretty much sing anything they want to for an hour, so long as they cover the ranges of their voice: loud, soft, high, low. We have a checklist that we give singers to make sure that they can cover the entire range. And then we clone their voice just the same way we do with the soloists. So we have a contract that they have a part of, and they will receive royalties just like it's not exactly royalties, but they receive a percentage of usage from the API when somebody renders a choir.
They can record it on a phone as long as they're in a nice, quiet environment. They can record that hour of singing on a phone, on a microphone, doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, obviously the soloists that we have will have a studio recording session. And some of them already have recording equipment, which is really handy. But for the choir, even though we're looking for a really high quality, it doesn't mean you have to have a studio. And the phones that are out now have microphones built into them that are really, the quality is high enough that it works for a choral situation. Because once we get the recording, we're going to clean it and EQ it and balance everything and make sure that it's spotless before we send it to be trained on. And so a phone or an iPad or something like that is generally more than enough.
The people who sign with you on the contract of the choir, they can rest assured that it's only used within the choir model and that it's not used in a solo situation.
Correct. The only exception to that is if someone wants to volunteer to be a soloist. So for instance, if you have a choral line and then there's a break and you have the word solo where you want one person to sing, then that would be somebody who's chosen from the choir soloists to sing that line so that it blends. It would basically be the same line, but everybody remains quiet except for that one person. So each person that joins as a choir member will have a box they can check that says, yes, I'm interested in being a soloist. No, I'm not.
And the way people approach you guys about that is through Discord?
Yes, there will be a form on the website. Right now, there's no login to the website, but there will be. And it's just a social login. You can use Facebook or Google or whatever. And once you get in there, you'll be able to see your account status, to see your license that you have for Cantai. And then if you're a singer, you'll see your balance, which is going to be paid monthly. You'll see your voice usage, so you can get an idea of how many recordings you've appeared in and things like that.
That sounds extremely interesting. And I'm sure if you guys are interested in being a part of the revolution, then feel free to check that out. That's really cool. Richard deCosta, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Everyone at home, feel free to hop over to the website of Cantai. Whether the tool itself is something that is necessarily for you or not, it does not prevent you from checking it out. There is a lot of transparency out there. The people are very nice, and get curious. Richard, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Guys, don't forget, hydrate, stretch, take good care of yourself. I'll see you on the next one.